Welcome to the Sheltazar Podcast. My name is Jeffrey Eisen. I am a spiritual life coach, channeler of Sheltazar, and an energy intuitive. This podcast is about using spiritual wisdom, insights, principles, and practices to integrate and embody into your life in a practical way. My guests share their story of their spiritual journey, as well as how their spiritual beliefs, insights, and practices have helped them live a better life. Their life stories help others understand and accept life's challenging opportunities for learning, expansion, and growth. The Sheltazar Podcast is all about integrating spiritual wisdom into your life in a practical way. And my guest today on the Jeffrey Eisen podcast is Michela Pasquali. Welcome, Michela.
Thanks, Jeffrey.
Yeah, it's lovely to have you here. You and I have known each other for a while, and I think your story is certainly worth telling to people. And I would love you to share with the listeners a little bit about yourself, your life, and then we'll get into a discussion of your spiritual journey and your life journey.
That sounds great. Thanks so much. So a little bit about me, I guess. I'm a freelance writer living in Toronto with my husband and our son, who's 12, and our dog, who's almost a couple of years old. For most of my time, I freelance with corporations in Toronto and across Canada, actually, as a writer for corporations. And then I also do some sort of creative writing as well. I've written some travel articles about many of our travels to Asia and Europe. And then I write poetry and short stories. And I have a novel, first draft of a novel that I've kind of go back to every once in a while and try to edit and try to finish, but I'm not in any great hurry. I figure I have some time for that. And yeah, other than traveling and hanging out in forests and traveling wherever we can, even on weekends, the other things I love to do are probably read and hang out with my family. Yeah.
Great. Sounds fantastic. It sounds pretty amazing, based on the COVID situation we're going through. It sounds like you didn't suffer as much disruption as some people because you can read, you can write from home, and that's really great. Let me ask you, was writing always something that you were drawn to? Was it chosen as a profession or was it a passion?
It was always a passion. Ever since I was a little kid, I loved reading and I loved writing. My parents didn't know what to do with me because I was writing poetry and writing stories. And they were like, "Oh, you're so creative. That's so weird. We don't know what to do with that." And I have an older brother and he would read stories for school. He would read books for school. And I would finish reading all the books that was from my grade. So I'd jump into his grade, which was a couple of grades above mine. And I would read all the books that he was reading because I was just devouring them wherever I could. And I just was writing, I would say, from when I was a little kid and then writing stuff whenever I could. And then as a teenager and then as a young adult, all through my life. Yeah. And then I did a couple of degrees in English literature because that was my favorite subject at school. I actually, when I was in high school, I wanted to become an interior designer, but I had a fantastic English teacher in grade 13 who did her degree in English literature. And she said, "You're really, really awesome at English. You should totally take English at university." And I thought, okay, that's a great idea. Yeah, because why would I try to struggle through a program that I wasn't so sure about and required math and all these different things that I didn't really love? So I ended up taking English, a bachelor's degree in English, and then a master's degree in English. And then at that point, I didn't know what to do with it. My mom says, "Oh, you've always been such a great writer. Why don't you take journalism?" So I did a couple of years at journalism at college. And then from that point, jumped into newspapers and magazines and then writing for corporations. Yeah, so it's just been lifelong.
Yeah, fabulous. Very fortunate because, I know a lot of people whose careers are more along their lines, their skills, than it is around their passion. And you seem to be very fortunate that you've been able to find a career in your passion. And I know your writing and it's amazing. And of course, I'm very jealous because although I had a grade 13 English teacher, he couldn't really help me because I was a lost cause when it came to writing. But, it's really important for us to realize that we all have gifts, and my gifts tend to be more auditory than written. And I've come to appreciate and focus more on my spoken word as opposed to my written word. But I think it's really great that you have been able to tap into that passion and also turn it into a career. And I know you're starting to shift some of that corporate writing into stuff that is a little bit different. And I've read some of that, and I think it's really great. What's your advice to people in terms of finding finding your passion and following your passion. In your description, you made it sound so easy, but I know having talked to people, it's a struggle. Some people are really, they have a difficult time finding the passion. And then if they do, they think it's kind of a hobby and they can never make a living at it. So what advice would you give?
When I was first starting out after I finished my degrees and then went to journalism school, I had an instructor at college who used to work for the Globe and Mail. And he just told us all, you could just send articles into newspapers and on spec, it was called. So on speculation. So if they liked it, they would publish it and pay you for it. If they didn't like it, they didn't publish it and they didn't pay you. So most of the students in the class didn't do it. But I was like, well, why not? So I wrote some articles and I interviewed people and I wrote articles on subjects that I thought they would be interested in and sent them in. And they were like, yeah, these are great. Sure. We'll print them on this date and we'll pay you for it. Fantastic. And so I think it was just trying. It was just people asked me, how did you get into it? And I thought I just went for it. I just tried, right? Nobody told me I couldn't do it. So I put it out there and somebody said yes. And then from that point, I kept doing it. And then I would send it out to different magazines and newspapers. And sometimes they would say no, but most of the time they would say yes, because I would do my research, right? So what kind of articles do they tend to publish? What's their publication calendar? Who do you talk to? So I found out all those things and then sent them to the right person at the right time before deadline and was smart about it, and just put it out there. Whereas other people would think, well, I'm a student. I would never get published in the Globe and Mail. But I thought, why wouldn't you? Does it matter if you're a student or if you're an experienced, seasoned writer? If you can write well, I'm sure they'll accept it, right? So I just did. And that's how I started.
Which is fascinating because what you've really described is the nuances of the laws of creation and the laws of manifestation. And that is the fact that you went forward with a sense of confidence. The doing, the yang energy was very flowing. There was not worry. There was not stress. There was not fear. It was just, I love writing and I'm going to share my writing. And I think that's really important because some people, they get a little uptight. Like you say, it's like, I'm going to miss the deadline. They'll never publish it. So it's that self-talk that slows down our creation. And so the fact that you followed your heart, and I know that you have a recent article out about following your heart. Yeah. And that's exactly, without you maybe knowing it. And I think that's the beautiful part is sometimes if we just come from our authentic self, things will happen. And it's when we listen to the mind that is always trying to talk us out of things that we sometimes don't get what we want or certainly slow it down and make the process more onerous. Would you agree to that?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. I mean, yeah, it's easy to get caught up in a mind spiral that tells you you're not going to be good enough or that you're not going to succeed. But then another way I tend to look at things like this is I think to myself, I create this other story, right? And I'm like, what if I was the editor of the Globe and Mail and a young person sent me an article and it was really well written and it was well researched and they followed all the steps that they need to follow. And I had the opportunity to allow them to publish and have their voice in my newspaper. Of course I would do it. I would want to do it, wouldn't I? Of course, right? If they made my life easy and they gave me what I needed and it had an opportunity to give somebody a chance to do something, of course I would do it. So I think it's easy to second guess yourself and tell yourself a story that you're not good enough. But then if you flip it and you look at it from the other side, and that is the other person who's receiving what you're sending them, of course they want to receive it and they want to do something with it, right? Because if I was in that position, I would do that.
Right. And you raised an excellent point because in reality, we don't know where that editor's coming from or what that perspective is. But what you did was create a perspective that had a higher vibration that made a lot of sense, right? Because we don't really know when we're going for a job interview, when we are trying to offer or sell our product or service to someone, we don't know what the other person's perspective is. We don't know what energy they're coming from. But if you can imagine it in a very positive way, I'm a believer that you could be influencing. It's quite possible that editor that you sent your article into, you had infused in that article was a certain energy or vibration that when the person opened it, they felt what you thought they should feel, which is, oh, this is a young person. I think I'll make my job easy and give them an opportunity. So there's so much happening in the invisible world. I think it's really, really important for us to stay positive and take a positive perspective, especially as we're going through these difficult and challenging times. So I commend you because I don't think that was something that you sort of studied or learned. It was just something that was very natural to you, wasn't it?
For sure. I think it's just, I've always had a trust that other people are good. Like I try to be good. I'm a good person. And I just assume that other people are good. I never assume that other people are going to try to take me down or are going to try to tear me apart or try to make me feel low or make me feel small. And I think part of that is, so it's a trust, but also it's this desire to open up and talk to other people, because it was just even a few years ago after my husband, Kevin, and our son, Rowan, and I, we went to one of our trips to Asia. We went to Singapore and Malaysia and Australia. We came back and I had taken some notes while we were traveling. And I thought, this would be a really good article. And so I wrote a travel article. I had never written a travel article before. All my writing had been different. It had been more business focused and corporate focused. But I read travel articles. I love them. It's something that I would always do. I still always do, because I love to read about faraway places and visit them. So I read some articles by this particular editor at a newspaper and sent in an article. And then he didn't get back to me. So I followed up with him. I called him. Hello, how's it going? Have you seen my article? And we had a conversation, and he told me some things that I could work on to fix it up and sort of make it a little bit more palatable for his audience. So I did that. We worked back and forth. But here's a very, very busy editor dealing with all kinds of requests. He was telling me, I think he received hundreds of articles or requests to publish articles every week. So just lots of stuff. And I just chatted with him for a little bit, and he was really, really sweet and very nice. And I'm like, this is my first article, but he liked the writing, which was great. And then it got published, but not only did it get published, he asked me to source some photos. And I'm like, well, I have some photos that we took on the trip. Let me send you those. But he didn't love them. I sourced some other photos. He didn't love those. And then I finally found some, contacted a travel organization in Australia and another one in Singapore. And I asked them to send me photos. So it was this big, giant collaborative event, me talking to the editor, me talking to these other people in these faraway countries, calling them, emailing them. And because I had done all this work, I guess, or because he's just a nice guy or he liked the writing, I'm not sure. He published the article and he published one of the photos and he put it on the front page of the travel section of the newspaper, right? And part of it was just my saying, I'll call him up and see what he says. Let's just have a conversation about it. Like, why wouldn't I, right? I don't know. Like, if all he could do is say no or not pick up the phone or say, no, I don't have time for you. But he didn't. He sat there and he said, I have some time now. Let's chat. And so I think I'm always hopeful and I always believe in opportunity. And I don't actually, it's rare for me to think, here's something I want to do. I'm not going to pursue it and talk myself out of it. I just feel like if you try, then you know. If you don't try, then you don't know.
Right. And I know you sort of take that attitude for granted, but a lot of people don't. And I think that there's a great lesson for our listeners. I know I'm a very trusting person and I've got a lot of faith. And to a certain degree, I have a certain amount of naivete. And every once in a while, my wife says, you shouldn't be so naive. But I love it. I love that. And that's what I hear you talking about, that naivete, that of course you can speak to the editor and of course you could speak to the travel bureau in Australia. That naivete has underneath it a beautiful sense of confidence and positivity. And so I encourage people to realize that the attitude you have, the perspective you take is your choice. And you are describing some very positive things that happened in your life because you didn't get in a dither. You didn't get all upset. You didn't take it personally when the editor first made some suggestions. You just went with the flow. And I think that is so important today, again, especially with all of the challenges and trials and tribulations we're facing. The smoother you can do things, the more positive you can be, even maybe the more naive you can be, you will start to invoke the universe to help you get what it is you want. I can't emphasize that enough. And I think anybody listening to you will realize that there's a certain calmness and confidence and just knowingness. And that's the key. That is the key. And you can't fake that, because if you would try to convince someone and you really don't believe in yourself, then I don't think it works. So congratulations. And it's wonderful that you're an inspiration for other people to show them how we can create. But we need to create not from the tenacity and the obsessiveness and the drive, but just from the flow and the positivity and the knowingness and the trusting.
Yeah, for sure. No, I agree. I think another piece of it is curiosity, right? Because I think if I had said to myself, I have this idea for an article, I wrote this article, but I'm going to send it out, but maybe they won't do it. Like that suggests maybe they won't publish it, or maybe I shouldn't do it. That suggests a lack of curiosity, right? Whereas I'm always saying to myself, let's see if it'll happen. Let's see if we can do this. Let's see if we can do that. Let's see if I can learn something new, right? So it's not just me wanting to get my article out, but let's learn through this process, right? Let's meet some somebody new. Let's talk to this other person. Many years ago, actually, after I had been an associate editor at a couple of publications, a friend of mine told me about a job at an accounting firm in corporate communication. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. Maybe that's something that I could do. Let's look into it. Why not, right? As opposed to, I don't know anything about accounting, and I don't. Maybe it'll be fun. Maybe this woman that I knew liked her job and she was a nice woman. So I thought, okay, let's try it out. So it's about curiosity and wanting to say, okay, let's go down this road. Somebody came to me and with an opportunity, let's go look into it. So I went to this, I got an interview with HR, then interviewed with the director of communications, and we started chatting. And it turns out he did the same graduate program that I did, and he studied the same things that I did, and he was interested in many of the same topics that I am in terms of writing and stuff. And he was another sort of almost naive. He had this naivete about him as well. So there's a lot of us out there that are like that. And if I hadn't gone on that interview, then I wouldn't have met him and all these other people. It's a place I ended up staying at for 10 years because I really enjoyed the people that worked there, because I felt like people like me, right? Who were positive and, as you say, naive. And I wouldn't have had that amazing experience if I hadn't been curious about, let's try it out. Why not, right? What do I have to lose?
Yeah, no, I love that. Curiosity, connection, positivity. I know when I ask you to be on this podcast, it's not something that you have done a lot of. And here you are doing a great job because there is that curiosity. Life is so much more enjoyable if we can look at it through the eyes of that curiosity, of that eyes of learning and growth. I think it's really fascinating. What advice would you give to the listeners about writing? Because writing is a very important way of communication. You know, we still have the written word, we have audio, we now have video. There are a whole bunch of popular ways of communicating. But for those who maybe would enjoy writing, what would you share with people in terms of the best way to approach writing? I mean, what if you don't feel articulate? What if you don't feel that you've got the skill? Should you still try writing anyway?
For sure, because we all write all the time. We all write emails all the time. We all write notes to each other, to loved ones. We're always writing. I feel like I'm always writing anyway. And right now, my son, who's 12, for a few years now, he's been writing in school, right? So has to write assignments and things. And I think he struggles with it because it's a physical thing where you're turning ideas in your head into words in your mind, and then you have to type them out or write them out. And so he doesn't know how to type. So it's kind of hard for him to get his ideas down on paper. And then he's not sure about what he's writing. So it's been a few years of him doing that. And now I see him getting a little bit more confident because I've always tried to coach him as he's been writing these last few years. And the thing that I try to get through to him the most is write the way you think, write the way you talk, write the way you are, right? Because I think some people think that they're writing for a particular audience. They have to write a certain way, and then they get caught up in that. And that makes writing difficult. When I first started writing for the accounting firm, they had a particular style, and I was able to fit the way I write into that. And then when I wanted to write for a travel magazine or a travel newspaper, I read what their articles tend to be like, and then I adapted it to that, my style to that. But it was still my voice. It's still the way I talk. It just maybe, formatted a certain way or something. So I think the most important thing is write the way you speak. So if you write an email to somebody, I think people think they have to be very professional. All the spelling has to be correct. All the grammar has to be correct. And you can't use contractions, and you can't say this, you can't say that. Whereas I'm like, well, no, for sure you can. Why wouldn't you? You would sound like somebody completely different if you wrote in a very, very formal way. Because the way you talk to your husband or to your wife or to your friends or to your family, you speak colloquially. You speak a certain way, right? But then when people turn that into writing, they think it has to be something different. It has to be formal. It has to be, like you would see it in a novel. It has to be a certain way, but it's not. I mean, I think if you write the way you speak, then it's just easier. It's just so much easier, and it's easier for an audience to connect to it as well.
I love it. I absolutely love it. Sometimes our school system can be a bit intimidating because they tell us about the rules of writing. And as you're talking, it brings to mind certainly a belief and a tenet that I subscribe to, and that's just be authentic in all of your communication, whether it's written, whether it's audio, verbal, whatever it is, even your body language. I know when I'm doing my coaching, I'm all over the place and I'm flailing my hands. If I had to sit there, now that I have switched a lot of my coaching to Zoom, whereas I used to maybe just do it over the telephone, it's easy to become a little bit self-conscious to say, oh my goodness, I'm moving around and reaching for my tea. But it is how I operate, and it is my authentic way of communicating. So I would certainly urge the listeners to tap into your authentic voice, tap into who you truly are. And whether you're writing or whether you are communicating, just allow that that authenticity to come out. I mean, when I write emails, I write from a very intuitive place. And if anyone's ever received an email from me, you'll notice it's rambling and goes on. And there's these great services like Grammarly, and they check my grammar for me, and they make recommendations, and they say that sounds redundant. And I say, the hell with them. I want to sound redundant. So connect with your authentic voice and communicate that way as often as you can. And I also want to bring up this pet peeve I have, which is text and emoji. I really find it very difficult to be your authentic self in a text or an emoji. So be careful not to put too much of your communication in a technological shortcut, because you're depriving the world of knowing you and knowing you fully. And so I think it's really important that sometimes we, just like you talked about some of the great successes and interesting experiences you've had, you've picked up the phone and talked to someone. Let's not forget that. Let's not talk about, direct communication. Let's not talk about written and not just text where it's auto-corrected and sometimes even gives you the wrong word. We've shortened our communication, and I think that that's a bit of a travesty. I think the greatest opportunity we have in life, the greatest gift we have, is to connect fully with other human beings.
I agree completely. And I think there's a mutual friend of ours, Mary, who I think you'll remember as well, because it was in conversations with you over the beginning of COVID, where she was saying that rather than texting, which was she was getting used to, and emailing, she was getting into the habit of picking up the phone and calling people. She did that when she called me one day. She could have texted me very easily and just asked me the question she wanted to, but she gave me a call. And I loved it because I love talking to people on the phone. I just love talking to people in general. And I thought, there are a few people that I really just text them. So let me just change that and just start calling them instead. And it's so much easier and more engaging to connect with people talking to them on the phone as opposed to text, because a text is more efficient. You can be really quick, really easy with a text. But there's just something that's beautiful and more open and more connected to who you are. And it allows you to connect more with to the other person when you talk to them face to face, for sure. But if that's not possible, then over the phone, because you can still get a sense of their emotions. You can still get a sense of their voice, and you can share so much more than you ever could via email or via text, for sure, or via emoji.
Right. And that's interesting. That brings up a guest that I had on the podcast a while ago, Lynn K. Russell, who had done a lot of research on near-death experiences. And she talked about the life review, which is when we transition from our human form, back to the great creator. There is something called the life review. And she was saying that during the life review, it is never discussed your status or your job or what you accumulated. The review is based on the connections you had with other human beings. That really stuck with me because it's so easy to get sidetracked into other less important things. And I think that's what you and I are talking about, is the greatest gift we have is our human connection with other people. And it's really important to make sure that we have that connection in a genuine, authentic way. And if you do, I think we have the possibility of peace in the world if we would start to communicate in more genuine and authentic ways.
For sure. I can agree completely. Yeah. I mean, chatting with people is my favorite things to do, is connecting. That's one of the reasons why I love, I think, the writing that I do, because I end up having to interview people and talk to people and get to know about their lives and learn about them, and then sort of distill that into a written word. But then just talking to people about even subjects that I know nothing about, that's my favorite thing to do in the world, because I learn something from it and the other person gets to teach me about it. And that relationship is amazing. And it strengthens your bond, right? It strengthens your human connection. And there's nothing like it. I mean, yeah. So. And
that's an interesting point, because one of the things that we are suffering now through in COVID-19 is that lack of connection. Yeah. We certainly have, the physical threat to our well-being with the virus, but there is a great threat to our mental and emotional well-being as well if we do not keep our connections. And I think, to be quite honest, I think that's why COVID is so rampant in the seniors' homes, because that's what those people people rely on. I know my mother, it was very interesting that she passed away in March, just as this thing was coming in. And she really, really counted on those weekly visits from family. And I have a sense that she kind of knew that without those visits, life just wasn't worth it. She was 92 and had lived a nice long life and decided to leave the planet because without those connections, life wasn't worth living. So I think there's an important message here in today's episode, and that is, whether your connection is in written form or verbal form or any way at all, have meaningful connections with people as much as you can.
For sure. I mean, one of the things that I see a lot of, because I have the opportunity to be able to call people or go out and sit on their porch and have a chat or whatever through COVID. And our son has had some opportunity for that, but not a ton. But one thing that he ensures that he has access to every day is playing online video games with his friends, because he gets to wear headphones and with a mic and talk to them and engage with them and play, which, normally he would do some of that, but then some in person, go play basketball, go do something. But because that is not possible as much, there's a lot of online play. And I listen to him sometimes just for fun, because he's on one floor and I'm in another. And I listen to him have these conversations and just giggle, uproariously with his friends, because he's at that point, that's his best, most important, most vital form of connection, is just having fun and playing with his friends. But he could even do it if they're in completely separate houses, right? So allowing him to play online games, some people might be like, oh no, it's a terrible thing to do for a 12-year-old spending so much time, but it's completely vital to him. He'll protect that time like there's no tomorrow. And I appreciate the fact that he does. I love the fact that he does that.
And thank heavens our technology is advanced enough that with this isolation that we're going through, we still have technology that can connect us. And here you are in one place in the city and I'm somewhere else. And it's as if we're sitting in my sanctuary chatting. And so big lesson there, connection. Michela, I think we're running out of time. We could probably go on for hours and hours. I really, really enjoyed our conversation. Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about how they can get in touch with you, how they can read some of the articles that you put out, and if anyone's looking for a great freelance writer, how they can get in touch with you.
Sure. I have a couple of websites, but one that I'll direct people to is michelapasquali.com. So it's MICHELAPASQUALI.com. And then that's where you can find some of my poetry, some of my short stories, some book reviews, and some travel blogs. And then I just recently started publishing some articles of my own inner journey on Medium. So I think if somebody were to Google my name, Michela Pasquali, and Medium, you'd probably find a few pieces there.
Excellent. Excellent. And those links will be in the description for today's podcast episode. Thank you for being an amazing gift. I'd love to have you back again and we can talk a bit more about that spiritual journey that you are on and what you've learned from it. But I thank you for sharing some really, really interesting points with our listeners. Anything else that you'd like to say?
Just thanks very much for the opportunity. This has been fantastic. I do love chatting with you so much. I always learn so much and I always have such a great time. So thanks very, very much.
Thank you so much. I greatly appreciate it. Once again, my name is Jeffrey Eisen. I am a spiritual life coach, channeler of Sheltazar, and an energy intuitive. I encourage you to check out my website, jeffreyeisen.com. Thank you, Michela. I greatly appreciated it, our conversation, and love and light to all the listeners.